Okay, so we're recording now. So, welcome everybody to our first event of 2022, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here. And it is our very great pleasure to have Agata Read here, Aggie, who's going to tell us a bit about her practice-based PhD, her research and evolving body of work in her presentation, Following the Sliver. Thank you, Aggie. So whenever you're ready, share your screen.
Yes, hello. Thank you for being here. Let me just see if that works. Right, can you see everything? Okay. Let me just see. Yes, hello, and yes, thank you again for being here and willing to listen to my path of research. I'll just start. So in my research, I investigate the relationship between embroidery and photography, thread and photography. I look at the thread as an introduction to feminist discourse in photography. Through work with the needle and through introducing the thread into the structure and the physicality of photography, I intend to enrich it with the femininity and strength of women. This presentation is divided in 4 parts. Background, where I will talk about why I chose to look into this subject. Context. I will place my research in a wider context, showing how the different concepts and theories surrounding my research are entangled. Methodology, I will briefly address my thoughts about research methodology. And the process, where I will share the outcomes of my art practice. But before I begin, I would like to share with you an observation I made admittedly quite late into the process. What you can see is a photographic sketch showing both of my grandmothers. The one on the left, Eugenia, was a tailor. The other, Elżbieta, was a surgeon. They have both worked with the needle and thread. Tailoring and surgery are at first impression quite far removed from each other. I was interested in looking into the work of a surgeon as a craft, a profession that requires unique skills in working with one's hands. It led me to discovering the work of Professor Roger Kneebone from Imperial College of London. What he does is investigate the synergies between tailoring and surgery. The thread used to dress and heal people, the knowledge of human anatomy, the deep knowledge of the materials, the awareness of the fact that each of us is unique. This photographic sketch condenses my research path. There is work with needle and thread, craft and science, photography, women and their stories. As I've mentioned, I would like to tell you why I started investigating the connection between embroidery and photography. Photography has always been important to me. It has been my companion in both my private and professional life. I am particularly interested in all aspects of highlighting the materiality of photography. And there are different ways artists intervene into its structure. There is collage. You can intervene into the photographic process. There is a performative photography. In this particular case, I mean the dialogue with the physicality of photography. I was particularly taken by the work of artists who combined thread and photography. This purely aesthetic interest has quickly evolved into a need to investigate the subject deeper. After I spent some time looking into this field, and without much luck, I have turned to photography historian, Professor Patricia Di Bello from Birkbeck University, for advice. She recommended to me the book by Jeffrey Batchen, Forget Me Not. This fascinating publication looks into the correlation between photography and memory by exploring the historical examples of combining photography and other materials, including the thread. Although very interesting, it did not totally satisfy my interest. I thought to look from another angle, So I decided to look into the history of embroidery. That's when I came across the book that turned out to be groundbreaking for me, The Subversive Stitch by Rustica Parker, feminist art historian. She says, "To know the history of embroidery is to know the history of women." To quote just one of the description of the book, in this groundbreaking study, she mapped the decline in the status of embroidery from the Middle Ages to the 19th century, from a high art form practiced by both men and women, particularly in England, to one that was seen as lowly and feminine, and from an admired professional art to marginalized domestic craft. Yet she also offered insights into the ways in which women negotiated the limitation of femininity, using embroidery as a weapon of resistance. Moreover, she brought questions of class into her analysis, examining sweated labor, the sewing done by working women, which then as now meant long hours and low wages. Indeed, her work continues to inform how we think of the role of embroidery in Western culture, the construction of femininity and the practice of our craft. This book has made me aware of how much working with thread is entwined with the history of women's role in society. That's when I've realized that feminism must be an important part of my research. That's when I realized that what I wanted to look at is photography, thread, and feminism. Therefore, I will now place my research in a wider context. To visualize where I stand with this research, I have created this diagram. It has helped me to move in and out of related fields of knowledge. The journey through these fields is what I would like to start with. Photography is in one of the most known publications from the field of photography, Camera Lucida, Roland Barthes writes, "The photograph was very old, the corners were blunted from having been pasted in an album. The sepia print had faded." What I found particularly interesting in this quote is that his first focus is on the physical properties of the photograph rather than its subject. Of course, the term physicality of photography has changed since his words were written in 1984. Then the photograph was an object. It had in this physicality a unique history. We have somewhat lost this quality these days, particularly when it comes to vernacular photography. Although I think artists these days are manifesting this physicality in different ways. Photo books are at the height of popularity. These are very carefully designed objects with an astonishing attention to detail. The way photography exhibitions are presented has also evolved dramatically. Photography is now an established artistic medium, even though it was only in 2009 that an institution like Tate Modern hired Simon Baker, a curator responsible for photography alone. He has done a tremendous job for the perception of the medium in the art world. Thread, craft, embroidery, needlework, textiles, all you need to do is to look into myths and legends to realize how entwined the thread is with human history. There are some that are widely known in Western culture. The one of Ariadne, Penelope, Arachne. But if you look further into indigenous people of Americas and Africa, you will also find amazing stories and legends. If you just look at the etymology of the word text, to weave, an ancient metaphor, thought is a thread, and the raconteur is a spinner of yarns, but the true storyteller, the poet, is a weaver. The scribes made this old and audible abstraction into a new and visible fact. After long practice, their work took on such an even, flexible texture that they called the written page a textus, which means cloth. As people were working with thread, the artists used it to create art. Textile art has long an interesting history as a marginalized form of art. Nowadays, it has changed somewhat. It has earned a place in contemporary art. What comes to mind when thinking about working with thread is the monotony, repetitiveness, gesture, process, ritual. Feminism. Feminism is not something I grew up with, and I envy people who did. Feminism for me is a process, which Sarah Ahmed, the author of the book Living a Feminist Life, describes To be a feminist is to be a perpetual student. It takes work, but it is also tremendously joyful. For me, it is a lesson in life and philosophy, an antidote to the patriarchy surrounding us, an inclusive take on humanity. During my research, I asked myself how the feminist self-education affects my perception of art, my perception of photography. In the midst of pandemic, the words by Simone de Beauvoir had been coming back to me. Never forget that political, economic, or religious crisis will be enough to cast doubt on women's rights. These rights will never be vested. You will have to stay vigilant your whole life. Thread and feminism, and the first of the common parts. The relationship between feminism and thread is strong and consists of many fields of research. The suffragettes went out on the streets holding the hand-embroidered and sewn banners. They had been plotting while attending the women's embroidery meetings. The second wave of feminism in the 60s and 70s deepened this relationship. In about 1974, in Oregon, the small feministic organization was brought to life. It has been named Ladies Sewing Circle and Terrorist Society. The name, as well as the sign, has highlighted the dualistic nature of the relationship between women and needlework, a domestic suppression in one way and the source of strength on the other. As Jeannette LeBlanc stated, a circle of women may just be the most powerful force known to humanity. Not surprisingly, feminist circle artists, conscious of the history of textile art, started to use it in new ways. Judy Chicago, in her famous installation, The Dinner Party, used 39 hand-embroidered tablecloths. It took 5 years and the collective work of 400 people to create it. Artist Maria Pinińska-Beresz, working with textiles, addresses women's place in society. Teresa Tyszkiewicz uses a pin as an artistic medium. With the second wave of feminism, the pattern and decoration movement is born. The idea behind it was the appropriation and deconstruction of decorative motifs from textiles, pottery. Joyce Kozloff, Dee Shapiro are using these motifs in paintings. Craftivism is a strong trend in today's art world all over the world. There are works like this of Rufina Bazlova, a Belarusian artist who finds inspiration in traditional crafts and uses it to address the conflict in her homeland. But also this ancient Afghan tradition of carpet weaving used to highlight the horror of wars. Photography and thread. Within the last years, I came across many artists working with thread and photography. In my research, I looked into the different strategies the artist uses by introducing the thread to photography. Just to put a few examples, Jessa Fairbrother embroidered the image of herself. She wants to direct our attention to the representation of women's bodies and ask how we perceive those representations. Maurizio Onzeri tells us, I work with sewing, embroidery, and drawing to explore the essence of signs in their physical manifestation. I take inspiration from my own personal experience and observation of how in other cultures, bodies themselves are treated as living graphic symbols. I then use sewing and embroidery in a further attempt to re-signify and mark the space with a man-made sign, a trace. Joanna Chumali, an artist from the Ivory Coast, on the other hand, sees her work with thread as a meditation, self-therapy. In those examples, I showed you physical, aesthetic ways of combining thread and photography. But I also looked into the process and asked myself, what do they have in common? I found a simple yet very clever answer in one of the issues of Powidoki magazine. Jerzy Olek, scholar, finds and connects the weaving works of Bauhaus masters with conceptual photography, which serves as a comment on its own medium. He puts together the work of Annie Albers and Beschers, subtle yet very important comparisons, same aspects of monotony, repetition, rhythm. Feminism and photography, the last of the common fields of my diagram. Historically, feminism and photography are mostly connected to the representation of women's bodies and the expression the male gaze, women seen through the eyes of men. The field of connection is still very strong today. But we also see photography as means to record a performance of feminist nature. What is feminist photography? The term is impossible to define, but that is what makes looking into it even more interesting. Getting to know feminist photography is a process equally as fascinating as getting to know feminist theory. What makes a photograph feminist? Is it the subject of the photograph? Is it the subjectivity of a photographer? Are there feminist materials? What are feminist formal and conceptual strategies? In the early 70s in America, thousands of women left their homes, sometimes their families, to live in a community with other women, building a new world order, the world without patriarchy. The radical feminist movement, which has completely rejected men in the act that can only be called a radical optimism. Women, mostly lesbians with fundamental joy, created a number of self-sustained communities all around America. Carmen Winant, an artist, feminist, and writer, who is one of the most important guides for me in the world of feminism and feminist photographies, has researched deeply the legacy left by those women. The photographic legacy created most of the time during the photographic workshops called the ovulars, in contrast to the seminars. Ruth Montagrove, T. Corinne, Hanny Lee Cottrell, Joan E. Byron are just some of the women who decided to change not only the world around them, but also the photographic legacy left behind. They decided to create photographs they haven't seen before, photographs of women just like them. What came out of these workshops are the most moving photographs of women I've seen, photographs that rejected the male gaze and the hierarchy of a photographer and a model. In my opinion, there are still not enough photographs showing women who don't meet society's expectation on looks, age, or vision of motherhood. 50 years later, another interesting trend of feminist photography emerged, the one that shows the world you need to believe in, the world where women feel safe and free, the world shown in works of artists such as Justin Carland. Another interesting take on feminist approach to photography is one particularly close to me, and it is the work that disrupts formal and material expectations of photography. And it is doing so by active proliferation, aggregation, and disjoining of the picture. The work, which is less concerned about image as the performative document, more about the engagement with the process and material interventions. The thesis is close to the Dada movement or beat generation, where the intervention into the material structure is a manifestation of the need for dismantling the social structure. It's also worth mentioning the contemporary movement, so-called selfie feminism, which is using Instagram as a feminist tool. I must say I'm not fully convinced, as it always brings back Audre Lorde's words, the master tools will never dismantle the master's house. Nevertheless, the feminist approach seems strong in many projects. Before I move to the center of my diagram, which is where all the fields I've been talking about overlap, I will briefly mention the methodology, which is an important part of my work. The idea of arts-based research is a very interesting subject, which is being continually discussed all over the world. It is definitely not easy to define. I admit that at the beginning of my research journey, I separated the practice and the academic research. What I found really interesting is that further along into the process, they both have merged, almost feeding from each other, where the methodology acted as the bridge between them. The question we need to ask is what sort of knowledge is being created through practice-based research? I have found a few concepts that help me in the process. These are praxis, autoethnography, embodiment, phenomenology, and author theory. The last term comes from the world of literature and somewhat defines the phenomenon that has been present for a considerable length of time. Author theory is a fusion between autobiography, philosophy, and science theory. It exists because of the feminist movement, where lots of women undermined the division between the theory and life itself. Marie Laderman-Uckeler in 1973 wrote her famous manifesto, which questions the hierarchy of work we do. In her performance, Washing Trucks Maintenance Outside, she spends hours mopping the museum front steps to highlight the importance of everyday maintenance tasks. She also creates this installation, which consists of 95 pictures documenting the process of dressing up the children before leaving the house, the process so well known to every mother. Like many feminist artists, she draws from her own domestic experience, asking to validate it and make it important. She is showing us that it's not possible to draw a line between art and life. Using the author theory as a transition, I will now move to showing you some of my work. This is the part I found the most difficult to talk about, partly because of the way I have been brought up in a world drenched by patriarchy, where women's work is usually secondary and less serious. Being conscious of those mechanisms only partly helps me with the fear of lack of competence. These recent years have been difficult for many of us. Lockdowns, school closures, limited support of friends and family. My work, like work of many women during the COVID pandemic, has been pushed into the corner of a living room, with time for work synchronized with the rhythm of domestic family life. I started working with my own image, intervening into the physical structure of the photograph with the needle and thread. I found inspiration in the old Japanese technique, sashiko. It is the technique that repairs and strengthens the fabric. I have used it to strengthen myself. Slowly, what started to matter the most was the process. The slow process of stitching, a process of craft making, has become very therapeutic for me. I began to question the form, the physicality of the needle and the thread. The process and the gesture became more important. This action, so entangled with day-to-day family life, has also become a time documenting process. The passing hours documented by the mark of a needle overtook the documentational character of photography. I can pinpoint every slip in form to a specific time and a mental space I have been. For this triptych, I have used the Japanese paper awagami kozo, which has a great strength while being quite thin. This property has inspired me to intervene onto the earlier stage of creating this piece by folding and creasing my own image, which seems adequate to the difficult time and my headspace at the time. I could then immerse myself in a stitching process, which would strengthen me. Working on this project, I chose to work with analog photography. The choice has been made as I look at photography as a craft. I look into the process of working with thread, but also into the process of photography, finding similarities and overlaps. I have also looked deeper into a concept of arachnologists drawn by Nancy K. Miller, the literary scholar. Miller's theory is based in a literary world, although I find it valid for all forms of art. According to Miller, the specificity of female writing is based on the assumption that the writing woman, like Arachne, leaves clear traces of her authorship in the work she creates and is strongly present in the text as creative subjectivity. The idea of the writer spider also emphasizes the strong relationship between the body and female creativity, as well as the connection between the sphere of creativity and the home family sphere, as opposed to characteristic male idea of separating the creative act from everyday matters. The work with thread inspires to think and reflect of human wisdom and knowledge, tacit knowledge. And I would like to finish with this quote from Juhani Pallasmaa. Even in the technological culture today, the most important existential knowledge in our everyday life does not reside in detached theories and explanations, but it is a silent knowledge beyond the threshold of consciousness, fused with the daily environments and behavioral situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Aggie. That's superb. I think we have a question in the chat about, oh yes, an idea of the scale of the work.
Oh, it depends which one. They do have different. I can show you the different document with the sizes if you're interested.
Steph, did you have any particular one in mind about?
No, it was just are they wall size or are they A4? I can't.
Let me just.
Are they human scale? Are they bigger?
Let me just show you. Let me find. So it depends which ones. So if I share again. So these are probably about A3 each.
Wow.
Can't see them.
Oh, can't you?
Oh, there they are. Yeah.
Yeah. These are slightly smaller. They're about 20 centimeters
Right.
on each. That's about 30 centimeters. These are 50-50. So
yeah.
Then these are pretty much A3 size, and these are quite big. There's sort of obviously they approximately 80.
Yeah. They're lovely. I like those very much.
Very beautiful, and just knowing that actually about the scale.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the work of punching all the holes and the accuracy, and when you were talking about that sort of the being in the world, the lived experience, the awareness of time and
yes, as I was saying, there's so many flaws that I can see. I don't know, can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Yeah, so see, for example, here I made so many mistakes, and I can literally, I know when I've done them, and but this is the something that I working with thread and sort of finding out more of working with textile, because my background is more photography. I kind of been far more open to, I wouldn't even call it to mistakes. It's more like improvisation. The things can happen. And because the process is so long, then I just don't think, I think it's just a part of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I think those mistakes are quite, what you pointed out as mistakes for me are a bit like when you get a Turkish carpet that has got a deliberate error in it to show that we can't do it perfectly, and I love that. So you should enjoy the errors. Or
I've learned to really. It's different to approaching photography where you specific. Yes. When there's so many technical things that you need to have it right. So I think combining out two, it is therapeutic, in fairness.
Excellent. Well, we have nice comments in June. It says fascinating, so many new artists we've learned about, and I totally agree that there were so many people that I hadn't heard of, and some amazing work there, which was, superb to see. Although obviously I particularly like when we get onto your work. Geraldine, also extremely complimentary. Now, Judith, is there a question? The link of the thread between your two grannies. Yes.
Yes, and as I say, I kind of, I was right in the middle into my research when I kind of looked back and realized that there is a connection. And and it was surprising to find, professor of the university actually researching the connection between tailoring and surgery. It's very interesting, actually.
Yeah. Yes, and again, that whole sense between, all these fields. And I like when you talk about auto theory and how it's this merging of, the autobiographical, the scientific, the philosophical, which is, I feel that's when I imagine in the practice-based PhD, obviously I haven't done one, but you get very deep into that sort of zone where it's all kind of feeding into each other and how that works. And then that that sense of the hands and all the work. And I particularly love that, you know, the image that we did your Facebook image of the month, the one with all the hands on the fabric.
Oh yes, yeah.
Which, you know, and again, I particularly like those, the sort of the studies of the fabric. They have this kind of very formal beauty, but it's also very tactile, you know, because of that sense of the work. So Cath says, that was so well prepared, coherent and packed with thought-provoking ideas. How long have you been working on this specific project?
Well, I started before COVID hit. And my initial idea was very different, because pre-COVID life was different. I started to learn one of the traditional Polish embroidery techniques. So I would go and meet the ladies, and that was the whole idea of researching that traditional technique together with the photography, so making like a document and analysis. But obviously when we all been closed and I couldn't go to Poland anymore, that didn't make any sense anymore. So then when I've discovered that Japanese sashiko, which was the problem that I had with that traditional Polish one, when I started doing it was very much, I had loads of questions about ethnography. It was very ethnographical. There were no, so everyone looked at that as something, you know, from ethnographical point, and that wasn't particularly, that's not the way I wanted to go. So in fairness, I was glad that I ditched that traditional technique and went into something more abstract. And so third year now. So almost there.
Shweta asks, beautiful work, Agata, and what a wonderful presentation. Could you walk us through your process from taking the picture through stitching? How long on average does it take for you to complete a piece? And lastly, what form of analog photography do you practice? Thanks so much.
The process, the creative process, if it was easy, it's never easy. I mean, I do walk quite a lot with ideas in my brain. I don't know if you have that. And, you know, it used to stress me so much, because once you go into that working thing, you just work and work. But then I think it was, what's the artist that I really like, who wears dresses? You know who?
Perry.
Yes, and then I've listened to some interview with him, and he said that, of course, this process is, you know, it's like almost like giving birth. It's quite painful, but then without it, you know, so he's happy when he has that difficulties, because he knows something is being born. So yes, I take photographs. So in the COVID era, I knew it will have to be me. Now I'm going to do other women, but in COVID, it was in lockdowns, it was me. And then I decide on the paper and order prints. And then I decide on the pattern of sashko. And then I need to make holes in them. So pinch it, or what's the, with like pre-hold them. So I've got the what is like a foam for, like you buy, you can order any size of a foam that is used for furniture.
Right.
But people do that even on like yoga mats or something, and then you put that, and then you just basically make holes. And with this big triptych, when I had this 80 and they were folded, that would be good 4 hours of just pinching it. So so that was and once that's done, you go with a thread, and that's what I like. That was the work that I could do with the kids at home, because that's something that you can leave on the table and come back to. So that was quite discovering that form of working. Yes, and then I take it to framers who have got a challenge with that, framing that. Yes, but so yeah, I think I've hopefully I've answered. Oh, and the analog photography.
Yeah.
I've most of the work I have used the medium format film camera. I like one that this is also a process. It's also there is a place for an error in it. There is the physicality of the film. Yes. So that I think I've answered.
Yes, absolutely. June is asking, do you ever print photos onto fabric?
No, I've specifically I specifically work with the photography as an object as we know it on paper, printed on paper, because then it's more like working with textiles, which is also very interesting and has been, but I kind of limit myself. That's what interests me, to kind of work with paper, really, and work with paper in the way you would work with fabric and what that brings. So no, I haven't, although it is quite tempting. In fairness, well, sometimes, I kind of stick to I am looking forward to be a bit freer, because I do have to do quite a lot that connects to my research and my thesis at the moment. So there's not much room or time left for just experimenting.
Yeah. Yes, I was going to say it must be difficult because, you're on this journey and you have to kind of not draw things to a close, but you have to kind of call a halt somewhere, don't you, with the experimentation, so that you can then present the final,
precisely,
but then be able to just go on with something which I feel like you sort of started a journey which is going to take you quite a long way, really, this work.
Yes, so as you say, I've I kind of got my last well, hopefully, I don't know what you call it's triptych and what you call with 5.
Oh, yeah, no, good question. What is it with 5? Would it be a quintic or a?
Oh well, if I run out of time, it will be a triptych, but that will be my final kind of bit, and then I will have to choose the ones that I want to present, and that would together with the written thesis, hopefully it will make more sense. So it needs to go with my thesis and my idea. So the printing on fabric for now is I don't. Yeah.
Just out of interest, because you're talking about it, with a practice-based PhD, how long is the thesis normally? I mean, is there a limit, a suggestion?
That's from my own research, it depends very much on the institution, because there's different percentage. There are Australians, they even got the arts PhDs pretty much without written thesis. So you only got artwork with a bit of an explanation. Where I am, it's pretty much 25-75, I would say. So there's more pressure to produce artwork than the thesis. But I'm kind of, in my head, it's 70 pages. I think I've, as I was saying, it's not the university thesis, it's not just writing, and that sort of gets a little bit of pressure down, because as I was saying, it's so difficult. I would much prefer to do just artwork, but it is but in fairness, I really enjoy like flipping from one to the other, and it does now kind of one feeds the other.
Fantastic. Nikki says, Jess Fairbrother works from the back. I wondered if you stitch from the back to get clarity of the pattern, or from the front?
Front so far, yes. Yeah, I don't think I would. I've done some tests and experimentation, and for example, it also depends on the print, but on the dark, for example, on the dark photographs, when you pinch it, and after you put a needle through one way, there's obviously a little bit of white paper that comes out.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because it made me question, like, could you have a print on a black paper? So when I pinch it, you know, yeah, but anyway, and then so far my pinching, the holes were quite sort of big. And as I say, Jess Fairbrother, she's very particular. I mean, she does it also because my mum is restoration. She restores old masters paintings, so she's got that very detail in. I must say I'm a little bit more like kind of I'm kind of more. As I was saying, I'm not that fast about it, you know. So if there's a bit of a mistake, if there's something, it's not supposed to be that kind of very in my work. Or I couldn't be. It's just so, or maybe it's just the household. You know, I've got kids, so it's just, you know, if you're doing it in the corner, you can't have. You know, I haven't got my workspace. I don't have the space to make it all absolutely flawless. You know, so I kind of learned to love the flaws, I guess. Yeah.
And it's kind of like the pattern of everyday life, which is very far from perfect, but it is a pattern.
Yes, and also, you know, it's like when you read more about things like quilts, you know, the whole idea of it, it's something, creating something new from scraps and fragments, and that's why I'm quite liking that work. That yeah.
April asked, she says, the styles of photographs varies. Have you experimented with different stitches?
That again, I would like to, but I haven't been brave enough in terms, because it is very time-consuming process. So once I get to, I stick to Sashko now because there are clear patterns, and I could pinch the photograph, and I know what I'm doing. I'm kind of aware of time, so I haven't tried, but I've got a book, and I would like to try stitches. I've tried to do like surface stitches, like oh gosh, I can't remember her name, does, but it was so difficult. I seriously don't know how she do it. Yeah, so I haven't experimented that with different stitches, no.
Yeah, okay. Cliff apologised for joining late and says it's wonderful work and a fascinating process. But apologies anyway if I've missed out any comments, because there's loads in here. Sue Hamer as well, wonderful work, great presentation. Now there is a question here. From June, have you always sewn, or is it a recently acquired set of skills? I enjoy thread but can't sew.
Well, the thing is, I also found out throughout my research that there's, and I need to actually go a little bit more, with the artists who are working with photography and thread, there are artists whose background is textiles, and there are artists whose background is photography. My background is definitely photography, and I haven't, apart from, you know, what you do in childhood and a little bit, I haven't actually worked with textiles that much. But but this is another thing about sort of a little bit talking about printing on fabric. I'm still, you know, I still love photography, and combining this two is what makes me really happy. And so I like to work with a paper. I don't know if it's like I am with that photograph, you know, a bit more with that physicality of photography, you know, through that stitch, which is important, but I don't come from a background, and I haven't got, so it's all really quite new. to me. Yes.
Yeah. And Geraldine asked specifically, do you enjoy the repetitive nature of stitching?
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah. I think there is definitely some meditative sort of ways in it, and I can see how, again, I was very much interested, the process, and I promise this all came, out of my own experience. It was very difficult, specifically a year ago, this lockdown just after Christmas. The first one, you've got this initial burst of energy. It was beautiful weather. We live on the seaside. You take the kids and you're thinking, okay, it's a bit frightening, but we're all together, and you kind of go like, we can do it. But that 1 year ago, I was really close to having some sort of breakdown. It was horrible. It was raining. They shut the schools. I have the kids at home. I thought, I'm just gonna go mad. And I must say that stitching, I could put, even, they watch too much. I've put the CBBS, I've put the headphones in. I was listening to people talking about things and stitching, and it has calmed me down. So I can see how. Then I found out that was a part of therapy for soldiers after First War. Crafts, when you've got trauma. Yeah. And after Second War, that's all became art therapy, and people started researching it a bit more. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, who is this? Dari. Were there any thoughts that came up about the rigidity of the photos and the flexible nature of the thread?
What do you mean by rigid? Can you explain?
Rigidity, the kind of the inflexibility in a way of the photograph, or the, that it's a lot less flexible than the thread. That sort of, I guess, the contrasting properties of the materials.
Yeah, I mean, any thoughts? As I was saying, I like working with paper. I like working with photograph on the paper, and I kind of think that both of them, it's something else. It's not just thread plus photography, but something that comes out of it. It's it is something else, but no, not specific thoughts. Well, I kind of know more about paper, and paper that you print photographs. Some of them are more softer, some of them are harder, some of them are more difficult to pinch through, some of them are, so that's what I've, as a craftsman, you learn more about your materials that you work with, which is interesting, because I never knew that much about photography paper when I was just when I wasn't stitching on the photograph.
Yeah. Clive wants to know if there's going to be an exhibition.
Yes, definitely. And it's all about the money, isn't it? Well, the thing, my course is in Poland, so I tend to do my work here, and then in the summer we go by car to Poland, taking all my work, and they being framed in Poland, because that's where I'm going to have to defend my thesis.
Yeah.
And then I can't, unfortunately. I wish I could, but once they framed, it's a very tricky thing to bring them over here. So it's just going to be one trip. Once they defend it, I'll pack it all. I don't know how, but I mean, I know there's people who are framing them for me. They will pack them, but I'll either hire a van or something, and I bring them over. Definitely, because it is quite hard to be somewhere else, that's it is really. I miss my work, I wish I could show I wish I could show it a little bit more, but then there's always a trade-off in life. You can't have everything. So, but yes, definitely there will be an exhibition. In fact, there's really only couple it's only 3 little triptych, the study of the fabric and the healing quilt, that will be shown in St. Leonard's in March, actually. So
Okay.
I'll let you know, because
Yeah.
there's a group of women who are setting up an exhibition in Electric Studios. Are they called Electric Studios? Near the
Yes, is it Electro?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there will be. So I'll let you know. There will be a little bit.
Excellent. Well, otherwise we have to have a Blue Monkey Network expedition to Poland, which I'm not against in theory, you know, but we're going to have to get a bus of some sort.
Well, I was that close again before COVID. We literally even had a date of showing work of my other 5 friends who were doing the PhD in the same year to show it in St. Mary Castle, the gallery down in the, yes, and then the COVID hit.
It's been so hard to get stuff done, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so Cath says, I like the way that your work has successfully made the connection between the concept and the physical objects, which, you know, this is very true. That again, the big bringing stuff together. June says, yes, would love to see them for real. Cliff's trying to do the, what is it, 5 when it's triptych, to what's the numbers up from triptych, but you know, for more numbers it's polytych.
Okay.
Have you looked at feminism and ink tattoos?
No, I haven't. There is that's the problem with the research, and you know, I do have. I like combining it. In fairness, it has been a big discovery for me, because I've connecting the research, the academic research, with art. It's kind of it really is that you can kind of go one way and swap in between. But also the one thing that is specifically in my case, but I think any other person that is interested, you can really go down the rabbit hole. You can really start digging and digging and digging, and you need to know when to stop, because there's so much interesting stuff. And specifically when you have to tell yourself, like, this is where I'm going, this is where I'm going, this is very interesting, but put it away, you know. Because so I'm at the stage that I'm, you know, starting to stress about, so I need to really close all this rabbit holes at the moment. And
it's really hard to stop reading at that point, isn't it? Because everything you look at gives you about 10 new links to more things, and you're like, but this looks so good.
Yes,
but if you read it, you might want to rewrite the whole chapter. So just stop reading.
Precisely. And you know, I'm very happy. I'm on the course that I've got a specific deadline, and so I totally understand how people do, you know, spend 10 years doing PhD. Totally possible.
Yeah, completely. But you know, you can just do your own book afterwards.
Yes.
Nina says, thank you so much. Your presentation brought to me personal forgotten memories about my grandmothers, especially one of them. I like how you unfold stories. Beautiful work.
Thank you.
And Jill, it says, thank you very much and looking forward to seeing your work. And Clive, yes, do let us know the details of the March exhibit. So we'll put it in the newsletter as soon as you know what's happening.
Yes.
And Steph as well, great work, serious and beautiful. What is it? Sharon saying something. Yes, hope to see your work soon. Nikki says, apart from your grandmothers, you've used specific photos you've taken. Any thoughts on using old family photos?
Again, you know, I've recently actually listened to a really good podcast talking to a guy who researches time, you know, and how our approaches to time, and how we, you know, how that we sooner or later have to accept that we will not read all the interesting books. You know, there's clearly, we've got very limited time in this world. I've got the collection of family photos. I've got the collection of, my father was a keen photographer and artist, so I've got all his negatives. that I've been going through and scanning them. But not only that, I've got my grandfather's negatives. So there is material, and it is very tempting, but I can see it's, it's a year's project. And I did do one project that was, but that was before I started introduce the thread in the photography. So it was purely photographic project, and it was about the country house we used to have and we used to go as kids. So yeah, it is very tempting. I do like vernacular photography as this sort of memory, and looking at the people who are not with us, even if you don't know who they are, there's this specific nostalgia in it that, is kind of warm sadness. It's sort of, it is the feeling that I really like. So yes, yeah, I think I also noticed that majority of artists who are stitching on embroidered photographs, they do that on found photographs. Yes, there's Jessa Febra who she photographs herself, but there are a lot more photographers who stitch on found photographs. Okay. So I kind of stick to my photographs at the moment. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, I've lost my place. Oh, Ismini saying, really beautiful presentation. Thank you, so inspiring. And Angela is also saying, thank you so much for such a great presentation and for sharing so much about your research. Wonderful work. Now, who's this? Is this June or Judy? I've only got the beginning. Really got a lot from hearing about the processes and the concepts through the diagram of intersection. Provoked a lot of thoughts and interests. Thank you. Oh, yeah. Yes.
It was, yeah, sorry, I just want to, with this diagram, it was quite funny because when I first came up with this diagram in my head, it was just so good for me to tidy up this, this sort of research fields around my interest. But then I think I said something, I thought in my head that this is really not a good thing in art world to do the diagrams, but then I've been told off, and I said that so many art historians love diagrams, that not to be so put off by the creating diagrams. So I kind of I quite like my diagram now. It really helps me to go around and basically close this rabbit holes.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's like, I mean, sometimes a diagram, just like I'm very fond of cartoons as well. And sometimes visual and text can communicate something in a way that just nothing else can. And in a way, it was reminding me of that, when you were saying about how when you first came to it and you were thinking of the aesthetic and the academic separately. Yeah. And I remember when I started foundation course, because my first degree was philosophy, and I was like, there was one piece we were doing a crit, and I was going, I didn't think that I'd be able to put my philosophical thoughts into, and I felt like a complete idiot kind of saying it at the time, because it's like, of course, it brings it all together, but it is that merging again of form and concept.
Yeah, it is a lot talk, I think now about combining different fields of knowledge to create new knowledge. It's really interesting. I think there's a strong, trend now to be more inclusive, not to put the borders around it, and I think a lot of people find them quite artificial. I always did. Well, if you're the stereotypes. My grandfather was a scientist. He was a head of polytechnics. So he was a proper scientist. So I always liked maths and physics, but also quite art, and combining it all was quite hard in yourself, because you kind of always being told that you need to fit into a pigeonhole somehow. So I think this whole process kind of released me from that a little bit, and kind of, well, no, you can do both, Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've kind of reached time there, and yes, more on, yes, diagrams, and Judith sent something about Carrie Crane diagrams in art, but I think we're going to, unless anyone's got a sort of urgent question, I think we will wrap it up and say thank you so much for such a brilliant presentation, and just, you know, fantastic work, and so amazing to hear about it all. And
thank you so much. I always feel quite stressed, you know, showing, but as Cath said, you were all here to listen to me, and you're not here to judge or give me marks.
No.
Or yes, so
no,
it felt really good to share it all with you.
And
Thank you.
And honestly, Aggie, we're not just being nice. It is fantastic work. It's really, really good.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you everybody for coming. I hope you enjoyed, and we will be back next month with Nikki in charge.
Oh dear.
You'll be great. You'll be great. Okay, everyone, have a lovely evening. Lovely to see you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.